Viral debrief. Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel 7-4 Gear is all about aviation. If you're new to the channel, this viral debrief series, I break down different aviation videos that people have sent to me. If you have a video that you want to see on the series, the two easiest ways to get them to me is either send it to my Instagram or post it on the 7-4 Gear forum, which is free. All right, let's get into it. Maybe some things have changed since flight school, because obviously there was a clear, nice runway to land on and they chose to land on the grass, but let's see exactly what happens here. It looks like their speed actually coming in is okay, but they hit nose down. They land on the nose because the aircraft doesn't flare at all. Watch this first touchdown again. If you aren't familiar with the term flare, right before the pilots actually touch down on the ground, we pull back a little bit. That slows the aircraft down and it gets it ready to actually touch down. You'll notice that commercial aircraft do it, but also the best landers in the world, birds, do it. If you watch birds as they're coming in to land on a wire, for example, you'll see them do this exact same thing. They'll pull back and their wings actually slow them up as they come in to land. It's the same thing that's happening with a commercial aircraft or any aircraft like this. There's no flare, so if you look at how he lands, it looks like he lands on the nose first. I think he damaged the nose gear here, but I'm not sure. Then he adds power, and they try to land perpendicularly against this runway here, which is a bit strange, and then they land nose first again. Since we're talking about crushed landing gear, there are two different types of landing gear that you'll see on an aircraft. One is a tricycle landing gear. That's what you're going to see on every commercial aircraft. There are more tires in the back than there is in the front. That's what type of landing gear there is in this video. The other type is called a tail dragger or tail wheel, and that means they have usually two tires in the front and one in the back. The easiest way to figure out which is which, wherever has more tires, that's where you're supposed to land first. If you have two or more tires in the back and one in the front, you need to land on those main gear first. In this case, he has tricycle landing gear but lands on the nose first. That's never going to work out. As he hits hard again on the nose, it looks like the nose gear collapses. This same thing will happen to an airliner if you land on the nose like this. With the nose collapsing and the momentum going forward, there's nowhere for the plane to go except to flip over. This happened very quickly, I'm sure, for the pilots. I'm sure they didn't know that the nose was cracked there. If that happened in real life and you knew your nose was cracked, what you'd want to do is go line up and land on something like the pavement, and you'd want to keep that nose off the ground for as long as possible to prevent the plane from flipping over. All right, let's see the next one. Nice recovery. I talked about in that previous video about a porpoising. That's what porpoising is. You saw how the aircraft is going up and down like that. I've talked about it in other videos. Porpoising is something that happens a lot at flight schools. I've done it, I'm sure, more than once at flight school. It's just because you haven't figured out when to flare and making those judgments to the ground and the speed and all those types of things. It's a lot that's going on and your brain gets overloaded. It's not something you ever want to do in a commercial aircraft. Overall, it was a very good recovery here by what I think was a flight instructor. It looks like, just from the outside, a student pilot was trying to land, they started to porpoise, then the flight instructor added some power and then got it back into a normal descent rate. My guess is, because I've been that student before, porpoising down the runway and the flight instructor says, hold on, and they take the controls over, add some power, and then just bring it in for a normal landing. And you think, how come I couldn't do that? It's just part of going to flight school. So if you're going to flight school and you're having this situation, don't worry, it's something that we all have to work through.
Here it comes in now, this JetBlue Flight 292 with that front nose gear pointed sideways.
Hold the nose.
Landed a bit long there, huh?
Seen a lot of smoke, but so far it's still intact. The landing gear.
He's now slowing down as best he can.
End of the runway.
Mighty strong landing gear here. That's the tires burning out there.
There's 1,000-foot markers.
Best of all possible scenarios, it did not collapse. The chin gear, or the chin of that aircraft did not skid down the runway. It has come.
Ah, yes, the chin gear.
The chin gear, or the chin of that aircraft.
I'm just kidding. I've said a bunch of stupid things, and I'm not even doing it on live television. They're referring to the nose gear, the tires up in the front there. It's called the nose gear. This happened back in 2005, and obviously pretty successful results, but let's look into it. If you aren't familiar with the story, in 2005, this JetBlue flight couldn't get the nose gear to line up when it was going into the gear door there, so they had to come back around and land again at LAX. The crew did a great job. They landed, and at the end of the day, I judge pilots based off of the result of their flight. So they got a good job. They saved the aircraft. Obviously, that nose gear was going to be trashed regardless. But there are some things in here that you may not have noticed when you watch the video for the first time. First, you'll notice that they used up a lot of runway. And part of that was the pilot that landed a bit long. Every pilot's done this. I've done it personally a bunch of times. I just don't have people with cameras that are filming my landings. It's just something that happens, and this is an unusual situation. Another reason that the plane went so far down the runway is that the pilots weren't using any brakes and the thrust reversers weren't out. Now, the thrust reverse doesn't actually reduce your stopping distance. It just helps protect your brakes. But the reason I mentioned the thrust reversers is because you can't see if they're adding brakes or not, but you can see that the thrust reversers aren't out. The reason that they're not going to want to add the brakes here is because that's going to actually push more onto the nose of the aircraft, and they want to keep the weight off of the nose as long as possible because you don't know exactly what's happening while you're sitting up there in the flight deck. Something that these pilots did very well is that when you're landing, you are used to doing muscle memory. So if you're going to have some type of landing that's not normal, you have to remind yourself, and the other pilot will remind you this as well, hey, don't do this or don't do that, because your muscle memory is going to tell you, throw the thrust reversers out or do something, put out your feet on the brakes. So doing this, they obviously did a great job. I'm sure they talked about it a lot while they were circling around and getting ready to land here, but they did a great job. Notice these bars right here? These are the 1,000-foot markers, and I mentioned that as well during the video. That's typically what we're aiming for when we're landing. We'll just be landing the other way. They're aiming to land on those 1,000-foot markers. Obviously, the plane is going the other direction, so I'm guessing he stopped with about 750 feet to go before they got to the end of the runway. That's really not a lot of extra space when you're looking at the overall length of that runway being probably about 2 miles long. Another thing that the pilots did very well here is they kept the nose off the ground, but not for too long. Sometimes what you'll see is pilots will come in and they'll keep the nose off the ground and they'll keep it off for too long until the wings stop generating enough lift and that nose slams on the ground. I've seen people do that more on smaller aircraft, possibly regional jets. They're keeping the nose off for a long time, and then when the wings stop creating lift, slams that nose down. They're trying to keep the nose off the ground for as long as possible because they want to have the plane going as slow as possible before that nose touches down, but there's kind of a balance. You keep it off too long, the nose slams down, and now you possibly have a much worse situation, and you put it down too fast, now your plane's going really fast, and you don't quite know how the nose is going to react. So these pilots timed it out very well. They left it off long enough to help the plane slow down, but not so long that it slammed on the ground. Notice here as they're coming in how long they're keeping this nose off the ground here, and then they let physics do the rest. Again, it's easy for anyone as they're watching us to say, oh, I would do this or I would do that differently. You don't know until you're in the heat of battle, which is what these guys are dealing with. Until you're right there, you don't know exactly how you're going to react. I think these pilots did a great job. As I said earlier, I judge pilots based off the results. This is an unusual situation, not something that you normally train for, a sideways nose landing gear. That's not a normal thing that you would ever train for. But they landed it right down the middle of the runway. They stopped at the end of the runway. They saved the plane and nobody got hurt. Sounds like a win to me. Let's see the next video.
At 7 a.m. Transferring to Seattle. I will be in and that's an hour and 20 minutes. So at lunchtime I'll be up there.
Here's the big plane going, hon. Watch the big plane.
Big plane.
There it goes. How are you, buddy? There it goes. Check them out.
Where are you at? Oh man, I'm just going absolutely nuts. got it. You got it.
The reaction from the crowd. Oh, oh! Yeah, I know, it's not normally something that you see. So there's some things that the pilot did very well here and some things they probably could have done differently for possibly a better result. You'll notice here that it looks like the pilot goes to rotate or get the plane up in the air. And as the pilot is doing that, that means he's ready to fly, but the plane is not ready to fly. See how the one tire comes off, but the other one just isn't ready to leave the ground yet? There are a few things that can cause that. I'm not going to go into all the details of the aerodynamics, but I'm just going to list off a couple things that could cause that. One, the pilot could be trying to get the plane off the ground too early. I don't think that's the case in this situation because typically a pilot that's going to be flying this aircraft is probably pretty familiar with its flight characteristics and the speed that it would normally rotate at. So I don't think that's it. Another possible situation is the aircraft is at a higher altitude, and again, I don't think that's the situation either. The two more likely situations would be the aircraft is heavier than the pilot was planned for or thought it would be, or it's very hot and it's created a situation where the plane is feeling like it's at a higher altitude than it really is. I think that's the situation. Another thing that you'll notice as you look at this video here is the windsock here. It's suggesting that there's a minor tailwind, but nothing that would at all be a factor when the plane is trying to get off the ground. Something that's really cool for airline pilots is that we don't ever have this problem. Every time that we're flying, we're able to punch in, obviously, the airport that we're at, the temperature, the weight, all those things. We punch all those factors that help the plane fly into a computer, and then it spits back all of the numbers for us. So it tells us at what speed we're ready to get the plane off the ground and a bunch of other things. You don't have that when you're doing general aviation. Some of the times you're having to guess, and that's obviously what happened here. The pilot thought that the plane was going to be ready to go, but it wasn't ready to fly yet. And here's where it starts to get into a little bit of trouble. You'll see here that once the plane comes back onto the ground, it looks like the right tire is actually off the runway. And with a lighter aircraft like this can start to complicate things very quickly because that right tire starts to drag, which wants to bring the plane more into the dirt. Of course, what is your natural instinct when your plane is getting pulled off the runway? It's to stop. And that's what this pilot did. But that can really backfire in this type of aircraft. Remember earlier I talked about a tail dragger versus a triangle landing gear? This is a tail dragger. Those main gears are in the front. And if you slam on the brakes too hard, it's going to flip over. Watch this. Notice the backside of the plane coming up here? That's from the pilot stomping on the brakes. See how the tail starts to come down again? That's the pilot letting off the brakes because they see that the plane is going to actually flip over. The pilot could have made this situation a lot worse had they just stomped on the brakes because they were nervous. He evaluated the situation as the tail went up. He felt that tail going up and realized, well, this is going to make it a lot worse. Better off to just stay in the dirt. Sometimes, like in this particular case, it's going to be very hard to get the plane back onto the runway. I don't know the systems of this aircraft. Really, one of the very few things they could have done if they had differential braking, meaning the right pedal handles right brake and the left pedal handles left brake. They could have done something with that braking to pull the plane back onto the runway. That would be very hard to do, and at the end of the day, this plane wasn't damaged very much, I would guess, because he didn't get it all the way over and have a prop strike, which means the propellers hit the ground. If that happens, it gets really expensive. Something happens here behind the Cessna, and I don't know what happened, but the crowd clearly liked it. I guess it hit some type of a hole, it spun around, and then that was it. It stopped right here. This was quick thinking by the pilot. He could have done several things to make the situation a lot worse. I don't know exactly what the cause was of the plane not getting off the ground, but it obviously wasn't what they planned for. But at the end of the day, he's going to be able to probably get an inspection and probably be able to fly out later that day. No problem. What? That one kind of reminded me of the guy who drove into the hangar. You're driving along, there's trees and a fence, and then you just don't do anything, you just keep going. I kind of wish there was side cameras here so you could see the guy's face as he looks over, like, man, what did we hit? I talked about it in other videos. If your plane isn't doing what you want to do, you need to do something different. I'm not sure really what they thought was going to happen here. The plane obviously wasn't going to be able to take off at that speed and not over those trees or clear that fence. I don't really know what to tell you. That was just dumb. If you want to see me doing some terrible landings, I played a Microsoft Flight Sim. You can watch some of my terrible landings right here. Or if you want to see me talking about how air traffic control and pilots starting to get into fights, and I break down some of those videos, I'll put a link to that video up here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.